So hello and welcome to another very short video, part of my very basic beginner settings series that I'm doing. I've done aperture, check out the link in the top corner, whichever corner it is. I've done shutter speed, again check out the link in the top corner, and also in the description there'll be links to those videos. I'm just doing some very simple basics, nothing clever, nothing technical, nothing mathematical, just to explain what the differences are by using different f-stops and aperture and by using different shutter speeds and stuff like that. And this time I'm going to explain ISO. Now I've got my phone with me hand because I've made a few notes, and I'm just going to explain these notes quickly because this is about ISO, and ISO is a really difficult one to just try and get your head around and explain, or not to get your head around, just to try and explain. Basically it stems back from the film days. Now I didn't do a lot of film photography. I did have a Minolta Dynax, but not professionally, not in any strength apart from buying a film and sticking it in a camera. Used to get a little bit of paper with some numbers on it to try and work out your exposure and stuff like that. Now it all works on the exposure triangle, which I will explain after I've done this video, so we've got all three of them to go together. So if you adjust one setting, you have to adjust another setting. So if you adjust your aperture, you have to adjust shutter speed, you have to adjust your shutter speed, you have to change your ISO, and blah 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 blah. So I'm going to do a quick one on ISO for you, otherwise it's going to take too long. So on my phone I wrote down ISO is light sensitivity. So the ISO is like buying film in the old days. If you would buy an ISO 100 film or a 125 film, your camera would shoot with an ISO 100 or 125, which basically means you have to adjust your camera settings then to acquaint to the perfect exposure for the triangle. But it would give you a really good high quality image. You then buy maybe like a black and white film for like an ISO 400. That would mean you can shoot in slightly darker situations, like the little bit that I've got behind me. I've got a few trees behind me, so you can shoot in slightly darker situations, but with the higher ISO becomes a penalty, and I'm going to try and explain that as well. So yeah, it's light sensitivity. ISO is how much light the sensor is sensitive to the how much light sensitive the sensor is. Got it out, didn't I? So the higher the ISO, the more sensitive it is to light, and it will let a lot more light. It's like a sticky pad. So if you've got a really high ISO of like 6,400 or even 12,800, I think mine camera goes up to, or more if I go into a high, that means that the paper's really sticky. So it's like every single little bit of light that gets in, it's stuck to that paper. If you go to an ISO 160, it's not as sticky. So it takes a lot more other settings to get the light into the camera to stick to that paper, but it will be a better quality. Like I say, I will come back to that. My camera's a native ISO, so whenever I'm talking about 160, most cameras it'll be 100. So my native ISO on my camera is ISO 160. That means that's the best quality image I can get out of this camera. That's the XT2, the XT3, sorry, or the XT4. The XT2 I think is ISO 200. That's your base lowest setting. Now they will go to a low. My Canon was an ISO 100, and I could flick it to low, which will take it to an ISO 50. This Fuji XT3 and my XT4 is a base ISO of 160, and you can click them down to a low, which I think takes it down to 80, but that's not necessarily going to give you a better quality image than your native ISO. Your native ISO is there for a reason. That is its best quality that sensor is going to work at. The idea of going low is it does some digital playing around, and with the digital playing around it gives you more light on the sensor, so it actually gives you another image. You can go to another low, and the reason behind that is if you want to go to a slower shutter speed and let less light in, you can then whack your camera down into the low setting. I know a lot of people use, I think, 64 on the Nikon, and I'm sure that's the ISO low, but I will be corrected. I'm sure there's plenty of Nikon people out there. No, there's plenty of Nikon people out there to explain, but I don't know how the Nikon works like the Canon. So yeah, I've explained my native ISO. I've also wrote down here, use low when need less light. So yeah, so if you're shooting water and stuff like that, you're going to want to get movement in the water. Now if you don't have the ND filters and stuff like that, the lower you can get your ISO, i.e. down to your native ISO, ISO 100, ISO 64, ISO 160 on the Fuji, that's going to give you your longer shutter speeds and stuff like that, because you're stopping the amount of light getting on that sensor, but it's going to be the best it's going to get. You can then click down to your digital ISO, which is your low, and go even more. So for water and stuff like that, if you don't have the ND filters, that's a good way round of doing it. And then your high ISO I've got in here is lets in more light, and which it does. So your higher ISO will let in more light. So I've got a situation in front of me which is quite dark. So I'm going to flick around and explain it on the camera. But yeah, if you go to a higher ISO, it basically, like I just said to you, it makes the paper more sticky. So it's, or the filter, not the filter, the sensor, makes it more sticky. So as soon as you open the lens, the light's jumping in and sticking to that lens. So simple, isn't it, really? Yeah. So the smaller the number, the better the quality, but the less light gets in. The bigger the number, the not so good a quality, and more light gets in. So I'm going to switch my camera on. Now I'm stood in the rain, and I think I've got a filter on the front, so I'm going to take that filter off and put it in a pocket somewhere before I lose it. I haven't got no pocket, so I'm going to put it in my hand. Right, so, not a filter, a lens cap, sorry. Right, so I'm going to switch my camera on and just basically run through a few photographs. I'm going to pop these photographs up in front of you. Now I've moved my camera, which is a real pain, because I had it all set up perfectly with the focus and everything. So I'm just going to refocus on the tree in front, and I'm sure it's perfectly focused as it is, and I'm going to go with that. I've got two trees. I've got a small tree in front of another tree behind it, a darker tree, and what I want to try and explain by taking the photographs is what it does when I change the aperture. No, when I change my ISO. Excuse me, because when I'm trying to learn stuff, I'll talk to you about technical information and I'm thinking about what I'm trying to say. I'm not very good at it. You know that. I'm better off just waffling. Right, I'm going to flip you around. I'm going to get the camera down low so you can see what I'm doing. Tilt my lens down. Right, hopefully you can see the back of the camera just there. So at the moment I'm on f8, and that's what I want to stick to, f8. I don't want to change that at all. I want to keep that because for me that's the sharpest my lens is going to be. And I've explained f-stops in the past. At the moment you can see on the right hand side I'm on ISO 160, and we're getting quite a balanced histogram. We've got a dark patch down the middle and we've got some light bits either side, and it's trying to balance it all out because I'm in aperture priority. And I'm also on manual ISO. So because I'm on aperture priority at f8, which is on the top, I've got these two are going to adjust themselves. So at the moment, f8, 2-second timer is on. I'm just going to make sure. And then I'll focus on that spot in the middle. All I'm going to do is take several shots of the same thing. Now I've got an exposure compensation dial on this, and I'll try and keep it to 0. So over on this right hand side, it's saying 0. So if I just go to my digital display, you can see what I've got there. Histogram, I'm at 1.6 of a second, f8, ISO 160. That's the one you need to keep an eye on, your shutter speed. So as I increase my ISO, like so, that's ISO low, so mine goes down to 80. So as I increase my ISO, 200, 250, 320, 400, it's getting stickier and stickier. It's going to stick more light to the sensor, but it's speeding up the shutter speed, as you can see there. So if I go right up to 25, 2,500, 5,000, 6,400, we're now at 80th of a second. If I go right up there, we're at 125th of a second. Whereas if I go back down to my native, which is 160, where are we? There, we're down at 0.2 of a second. Okay, so that's basically how that's working. So I'm going to take this shot. This is base ISO, f8, 0.2 of a second, and you'll hear it click. So that's quite slow. So it's quite a slow shutter speed. Now if I had someone moving in that, or I had water, or I had something and I wanted to get a nice frozen shot, I need to go faster. So a slow shutter speed is no good. On landscape this is fine, but if this wind was here and these trees were moving around in the wind and I wanted to get those trees nice and sharp, my shutter speed at that speed is no good. Now the only way to get a better shutter speed, if I still want to keep f8, is I've got to increase my ISO. Now I'm going to increase my ISO up to 640, as you can see there. ISO 640, that's now giving me a 1/10 of a second. As you listen to the camera, it'll be quicker. See, that's a lot quicker, so you've got more chance of keeping those leaves from moving. Now I know they're not moving, it's not the best example in this, but there's no wind around, it's just rain at the moment. But that might not be sharp enough. We might have somebody running across the image and we want to catch them sharper. So we're going to increase it even more. So we're going to take our ISO up now. Let's go crazy. Let's go up to 2,200, 3,200, and you'll hear it's a lot quicker. And then we go again, we'll go up to 6,400, and each time I change you'll notice that my shutter speed changes, and then we're going to go right up to something crazy like 12,800, and we're even going to go to high. The opposite end of the scale you can go to ISO high, which is digital ISO, and it's going to take me to 25,600, which is going to give me 400th of a second shutter speed, which is really fast. Now, any leaves in there will be absolutely solid, nice and sharp and stuff like that. But with these ISO becomes a penalty. And the penalty is, the more sticky the sensor is, the more light that you let in, the more grainier your image is going to be. So your best ISO is always your lowest ISO. That's the best place to keep it. But if you want to get more light into the camera and you still want to use a shutter speed of aperture of f8, you've got to sacrifice something. And to sacrifice movement in your image, or you're going to sacrifice time. So I've got to sacrifice time. I might have to go up to ISO 640, which is still going to be pretty good. But once you start to get to 3200 like that, then you're starting to see a bit more notice in the image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put these images up on the screen. I'm going to blow them up as well. I'm going to zoom right in. Excuse me. I'm going to zoom right. That's not good, is it? I lost my voice then. I'm going to sound funny. Look, I've got a bit of wind coming in the image. How strange is that? I'm going to take these images again, and I'm also going to take the images. If I get this bit of wind that is moving, because the trees are now starting to move in front of me, I'm going to do the same thing for you to try and get a bit of movement in the leaves. So I'm going to put all these images up with the ISOs and the different grain levels, and I'm also going to put the same ones up with the different movements, so you can show you by increasing your ISO and letting more light in, making that sensor more sticky, you're going to get a different shutter speed. So hopefully that basically explains what it does. It just basically means your sensor is sticky to light. Like in the old days when you buy film paper, it would be more sticky to light. The sensor does the same thing. Very simple, very easy, but not always used. Most people leave their camera on the same ISO. If you want to do sports photography, that's the thing, and you're catching moving cars, moving bikes, people running track events, and horses, equestrian, jumping, you know, anything like that. I shot some ice hockey, and when I was shooting the ice hockey, I was actually shooting indoors. So even though it's bright and light with the ice, it's still quite dark. It's not like being out in the open when it's really, really bright and you can get all your settings to where you want them to be. I had to shoot with a higher ISO, and I will put some images up, and I'll put the ISOs up for you so you can see the difference. But to get them sharp and to get to a shutter speed that was fast enough to capture the image and to capture the motion, I had to sacrifice my ISO. So that's basically how it works. Now there is a better way, there is another way around doing it, and that's, like I said before, about using aperture. You can wind your aperture right down, go around to f2, 2.8, f1.4, whatever your camera is, your lens is capable of doing, and that will also let a lot more light in. So there are other ways of doing it. I'll explain that in exposure triangle. But that's ISO basics. Very, very basic, very, very simple. Any questions, give us a shout. Excuse me, me keep knocking this, and my mic's right next to it, so you probably hear the bits and stuff everywhere. God, I'm professional at all this, aren't I? Till next time, ciao for now. Don't forget to check out the other two, and I'm going to do a compositions made simple as well for you, and rule of thirds and all that sort of stuff, just to make it something for the beginners and the basics. And yeah, till next time, ciao for now.